The rise of cheap print in the form of chapbooks was intertwined with the rise of literacy in early modern Europe. Technological changes in printing, like cheaper paper and increased speed, made the production of cheap print possible. Over 3 to 4 centuries in this period, from about 1500 to 1800, cheap print found an audience in a public that was experiencing increased levels of literacy. This public in turn influenced the format and content of the chapbooks, influencing publishers and booksellers and affecting what they printed. This documentary illustrates the intertwined nature of the chapbook, printing, and literacy in this period. So what is a chapbook? The most simple description of a chapbook is any publication carried and sold by a chapman. A chapman was a traveling salesman with roots all over much of Europe. Chapbooks are often categorized by their contents, divided into penny merriments, penny miscellanies, and penny godliness. Sometimes children's books are added to this description. The most complete description categorizes chapbooks in terms of their physical form, cost, distribution method, and content. All of these characteristics influence the rise in popularity of chapbooks. Since Gutenberg's initial invention, changes in printing technology made increases in the speed of production and consequently a reduction in cost possible. The cost of paper, initially a large proportion of the cost of a published item, fell rapidly in this period, and improvements in ink and metal allowed publishers to turn to the marketing of books rather than continuing to concentrate on the craftsmanship. Another way to reduce costs was reusing woodcut illustrations in multiple books. Here are some examples of woodcuts to show the range of topics. Some of these are reproductions, some of them are originals. This short video shows a short chapbook. Chapbooks were printed on one page and were then folded to create smaller pages. They were of varying sizes depending on how many folds were to be made. They were hand sewn and they usually didn't have covers. They often had a woodcut illustration on the front page, sometimes hand colored, to encourage purchasers. For them to be widely distributed, they needed to be small and portable, so that chapmen could carry large numbers of them to sell. So, who was reading these chapbooks? Literacy in this period was varied and affected by gender, occupation, parents' occupation, level of schooling, language used, and socioeconomic status. One way scholars determine literacy levels in this era is by using records in which people sign their names. While this is useful and helps map overall literacy trends, it excludes other types of literacies that are harder to trace, like reading only, vernacular only, and language-specific literacy. Other scholars use the records of publishers and book owners to indicate the profusion of chapbooks and other cheap print, as indirect evidence for how many people might be literate. Other indirect evidence for literacy is in the distribution of broadsides and chapbooks shown in lists of vendors as evidence of their penetration into society, even outside major cities. This research indicates that reading was more socially distributed than writing. Social, economic, and religious forces also affected the rates of literacy. In the earlier centuries of this period, children and adults were learning and reading at home and in the workplace, not during formal schooling. During periods of great change, like the Renaissance and Reformation, as humanist thinkers began to believe that everyone should be literate, there was an increase in the availability of vernacular publications, also affecting literacy rates. Religious forces both encouraged and discouraged reading, often based on the gender and social standing of the reader. All of this research is impeded by the transitory nature of chapbooks and related cheap print. Historians have limited materials to refer to, as this kind of print was often read by many and then used in different ways that destroyed it, rendering it less visible in the historic record. Print that was no longer used for reading was variously used as toilet paper, for lighting pipes, for lining pie plates, and for wrapping items. The illustrations in chapbooks, often repeated in various different titles, were familiar and symbolic and helped readers interact with the works. Familiar stories, illustrations, and formats eased the move from broadsides to chapbooks and were helpful to readers with minimal reading skills. Chapbooks were remediated from their precursors, ballads and broadsides. As Boulter notes, this newer medium borrowed characteristics from the older one. Broadsides were printed ballads, closely related to oral culture. Chapbooks used the conventions of broadsides and ballads, familiar formats and techniques from oral literacy. Even while this change was happening in the 19th century, religious groups were explicitly using the chapbook format and traditions to try and affect the morals of the public and to provide a counter to what they considered the low moral standards of most chapbook content. As with the change from ballads to chapbooks, the change from chapbook to what came next saw elements of what came before being used during the transition. Chapbooks were possible because of cheap print, made possible by technical advances in paper, ink, and printing presses. The public, with varying and generally increasing literacy, demanded more titles and different subject matter. Publishers printed them as they could make money from their sale, and they had previously created distribution methods for when they sold ballads. Demand plus technology intertwined and iterated in the form of the chapbook, bringing together elements of oral and literate culture.